Hey everyone, how's it going? Truman here, and today's video might be a bit extreme for some individuals, so if you feel like maybe you don't want to stick around for it, feel free just to leave me a happy birthday in the comments, as my birthday was yesterday, and join me for the next video. But as always, I appreciate anyone who sticks around for this thought-provoking video as we analyze
Euphoria.
Now, some of you might know this infamous series, whether you've seen the very shoddy hentai adaptation, or you've experienced a visual novel yourself, or maybe you're even in the latter group where you just heard about it and you heard there was really effed up stuff in it.
Welcome! Punch!
Regardless of what group you're in, you might have heard that Euphoria itself is thought-provoking. Some even calling it a masterpiece, with stellar writing. I'll give a little bit of backstory of my interactions with Euphoria. I had seen the adaptation, I want to say around the time it aired, so it had to be around 2011, 2012, somewhere around that time span. I was most likely just getting out of high school or just starting college.
But isn't that like age-restricted content?
Maybe. But like, who cares, am I right?
And by far, like, as a teenager, it was just like your average hentai thing. I was just a horny kid. Around 1 to 2 years later, I would really get into visual novels. At the same time, Euphoria would drop more episodes. I had then learned that Euphoria came from a visual novel, and so I decided to go out and download it. And I can say the experience was a roller coaster. I had never really seen media that dark before. I knew what Berserk was, and one of my friends, she was really into Berserk, but I really didn't experience Berserk firsthand at that age. And I didn't know things could get this heavy. For sure though, Euphoria made me a fan of Clock Up and all of their visual novels. For the most part, most of their visual novels are nukige, and they're not really thought-provoking, they're just there for stimulation. But something about Euphoria was so different, especially compared to like one of their other popular series, Eroge. It made me think, it made me question things, especially when I completed the game. Now luckily for you, I'm not actually telling you to go out and watch or play the visual novel. I think you should probably play the visual novel if you're into that kind of stuff and you don't mind dark storytelling and strong fetishes too. I would definitely say go out and get the visual novel. But anyway, lucky for you guys, I'm going to go ahead and recap the whole story, the true ending and everything, and try to keep it really concise, as it can get kind of confusing. And this is because simulations, memory manipulation, what's real, what's fake are all inserted into the story. It can become a bit incoherent and sometimes not make a lot of sense.
Euphoria.
ティンクティンクいつした世界は素敵なんだね、ケイスケくん。見たことのない世界を君と二人で見に行こう。そう言ってくれた。嬉しかった。嬉しかった。嬉しかったよ。私、何も知らなかった。あなたが全部教えてくれた。大切なこと全部教えてくれた。おいしい。きれい。ありがとう。みんなあなたがくれた。きれいなものたち。ありがとう。ありがとう。ケイちゃん。大好き。大好き。忘れない。忘れない。絶対に忘れない。世界はとても美しくてキラキラしていて、そんな世界を二人で歩いて回ること、あなたとの約束、絶対に忘れない。
Now, instead of explaining it in how the game displays its events, I want to explain everything in chronological order. Now, of course, I'm going to go through broad strokes. There's a YouTuber called Chiken who already did a video on Euphoria, and he goes throughout the whole story. So if you want a more in-depth retelling of the story without having to go play it yourself, I think that video is great, is top tier for sure. So we have a girl with no name. She stumbles upon a cave where a boy is hiding out in. The two get to know each other, the boy being named Keisuke, and these two begin to bond over a course of time, the boy even giving her a name, Nemu. Nemu is later kidnapped by people from a facility. Keisuke goes after her, trying to save her, only for the scientists at the facility to tell Nemu that if you don't erase this boy's memories, we'll kill him. Keisuke, being the only friend Nemu knows, decides to erase his memories as she doesn't want him to die.
やめて！お願いします。お願い。殺さないで。ケイちゃんを殺さないで。私がスイッチを押したら、ケイちゃんは生きてお家に帰れますか？さようなら。大切なことはみんなあなたが教えてくれた。おはよう、こんにちは、おやすみなさい。そして さようなら。
Nemu is a pivotal piece to these scientists' research. They're trying to create what they call paradise. And a key component to that paradise is a sleeping beauty, also known as a Nemuri Hime, which Nemu's name is an offshoot of. The goal of the sleeping beauty is to create a dream world where they want to escape to. And the scientists want to use this to create a virtual reality where rich and wealthy patrons can escape to. But in order for the sleeping beauty to create the paradise, she has to be at the highest point of her despair. A few years later, Nemu is allowed to go to a high school. And to her shock, the boy that she had once met in the forest, Keisuke, is there. Time goes by and they're living a happy school life. Keisuke still doesn't quite remember her since his memories have been erased, but for the most part, this is a happy time for Nemu. But their days of peace was interrupted by a sudden death game.
皆さん、こんにちは。人殺しゲームにようこそ。意外に早かったのね。あなたたちを侮ってたわ。いらっしゃい。そして、さようなら。ちゃんと完成したわよ。私が成功させたの。この世界に絶望し、拒絶し、逃避することで眠り姫は完成する。高藤圭介。まったくくだらない男だったけど、ちゃんと期待通りの働きをしてくれたことについては感謝してもいいわ。おかげでネムは眠り姫になった。時代の生態パーツとして完成した。この男を泳がせたのは正解だったわね。おかげでネムにとどめを刺せたわ。この男が死んだことで、ネムはこの現実世界に絶望し、楽園へと行くことを望んだ。計画は完璧に遂行された。さあ、そんなところにうずくまってないで。行きましょう。お姫様。お願い。ケイちゃんを助けて。この男を殺した相手にお願いするの？お願いします。ケイちゃんを助けて。ならば、賭けをしましょう。この男を助けてあげる代わりに、あなたと私で賭けをするの。ケイちゃんを助けてくれるなら、私、何でもします。私と彼女の賭け、ケイちゃんの記憶をすべて奪い、ゲームを始める。何度も何度も数えきれないほど経験した残酷なゲームたち。でも、これが最後のゲームになる。賭けの内容は、私が殺されるほどケイちゃんに憎まれること。私を殺したら、ケイちゃんは助かる。殺されずに済む。頑張る。頑張るよ。だから、ケイちゃん、私を憎んでね。私を犯してね。私を、間違いなく、殺して。
With the end result of Keisuke being impaled by a steel beam. The one who tried to kill Keisuke is called Kanae. She was planted there by the research facility. Kanae was pretending to be friends with Keisuke and Nemu the whole time, and all of this was a ploy to sink Nemu to the greatest despair. Nemu pleads to Kanae to save Keisuke. Kanae agrees on the one condition, that they play a game. Kanae's conditions for Nemu is to make Keisuke hate Nemu so much that he would kill her. And so from here, this is where the anime and the game both start. A big part where most people are confused is what is a simulation and what was reality. At this point, everything is still real. The underground games are still real.
首を折る直前まではあなたの本当の経験。折った瞬間の感覚はあなたの脳に流し込まれた偽情報。
So now Keisuke wakes up. He finds himself in an underground facility. He's accompanied by a group of women, and these women include Nemu, who is putting on an act to fulfill her conditions with Kanae. Kanae, who is also putting on an act pretending to be Keisuke's childhood friend. Rika, a young and naive girl. Rinne, a quiet and mysterious student. Miyako, a student that doesn't stick around for very long in the story. And their teacher, Natsuki Aoi, who is actually an undercover spy. But from here, they had to participate in a number of challenges, where Keisuke has to do what I'm gonna call pranks. You can see the word up here on the screen. I'm gonna say pranks because I can't use that word too many times in the video. I'm gonna get banned. But Keisuke must perform cruel acts on his peers and his teacher in order for them to survive the game. Now, the game opens up at this point. Before unlocking the true route, you can choose up to the 4 of the girls: Nemu, Rinne, Aoi, and Rika. You cannot choose Kanae until you beat Nemu's route. And for the most part, all of these routes play out generally the same. So after Keisuke performs multiple pranks on these women,
prank, baby! Yeah! Filthy prank! Filthy prank! You just got pranked, bro!
they're able to escape the underground facility. Now, in order to get the true ending, you must choose Kanae all the way through, and this is very important because Kanae throughout this whole point is just acting to be your childhood friend, under the assumption that Keisuke would not perform cruel acts on her. The game even goes out of its way to show, whoa, do I really want to do these things, Kanae? Do I really? And this is because Keisuke is being manipulated through a collar on his neck that's able to alter his memories, perception, and senses. But no matter what route you choose, there is one thing that is apparent, that Keisuke is becoming more and more deranged as time goes on.
こんな恐ろしいゲームに狂犬が混じってるなんてね、内緒にしておいてあげる。だから私の言うことを聞いて。
He's fueling a beast inside of him that hungers and desires to hurt other people, all the while Nemu is continuing to feed into those desires. And one of the routes, he can end up killing Kanae just to feed and satiate his lust for hurting other people. After the students finish the underground game, they have to go through a survival game as well, which this is Keisuke saving all of the girls through many types of traps. From here, all the characters escape the underground facility and then proceed to pass out. Keisuke then wakes up in the underground bunker. He is accompanied by Kanae, and they head towards the school. At this point, if you followed Rinne's route, you would have gotten a totally different ending compared to Rika or Natsuki. So we're just going a little field trip to talk about Rinne's route. Rinne is Keisuke's daughter.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
How is this possible when they're around the same age? After Nemu had erased Keisuke's memories when they were children, Keisuke was then later kidnapped by a cult. The cult leader then had her way with the young Keisuke at the time, and then became pregnant. The scientists from the facility decided to take the woman's fertilized egg and place it inside of a child that had no sexual reproductive organs. They were asexual by biology. And through some gene mumbo jumbo, they were able to create Rinne, who ends up looking older because of the genetic surgery that they applied to her. But Rinne herself also believes that she can produce a savior from Keisuke, who is actually her father. And so her route, she becomes obsessed with creating a new savior through him. But that's Rinne's route. So we go back onto the true route. Kanae and Keisuke are captured by Nemu, who became the monarch of the school. All of the other students follow her command. Nemu's end goal is to break down Keisuke enough that he'll end up hating her and then proceed to kill her. In an act of desperation, she uses her power to control her underlings to assault Kanae, pushing Keisuke to the brink. At this moment, Keisuke jumps on top of her and starts strangling her, inevitably snapping her neck.
今日もあの子を使ってもらうわ。今、ホカリさんを連れて出て行って。残念でした。
But at the moment of the snap, Keisuke wakes up in the facility, and he is approached by Kanae. And over the course of Kanae and Keisuke's dialogue, she gives us insight into everything that happens. She allows Keisuke to go see Nemu, but once Keisuke opens the door that Nemu is supposed to be behind, he is pulled into a simulation, one created by Nemu, to live out their perfect life together. Keisuke knows this isn't how he wants to live his life. He wants to live his life with the real Nemu, and he rejects her reality. He rejects the paradise she created for the two of them.
お願い、ケイちゃん、お願い。ここから出ないで。私と一緒に、私と二人だけの世界に生きて。そして時が来たら、私と一緒に楽園にたくさん どいことをした。許してって言えないくらい、私、たくさんの醜いことをした。でも私、どうしてもあなたを助けたかった。他のすべての命を犠牲にしても、あなたを助けたかった。私が欲しいのは、あなただけだから。あなた以外何もいらないから。ケイちゃんの言葉を信じて生きてきた。でも、素敵なものなんて何一つなかったよ。ケイちゃんを殺してしまうようなこんなひどい世界なら、いらない。現実なんて嫌なことばかり。何一つ思い通りにならない。大好きな人を傷つけなくちゃならない。絶望だらけの醜い現実。醜い。でもそれは、私も同じ。でもいいの。もういいの。全部忘れられるから。
He is allowed to then leave the facility after meeting with Rinne for one last time. Rinne's body is mangled due to the actions of Nemu back in the school.
私は、ここに残る。誰の命令でもない。私の意志で。お礼はいらないわ。あなたが生きて帰ること、その意味を忘れないで。あなたは勝者よ。ええ。もう二度と会わないでしょう。だから、さようなら。
Now with Keisuke leaving the facility, he's able to go out and live his regular life. But instead, he wants to save Nemu. So he contacts Natsuki Aoi and asks her to train him. Sometime later, Keisuke is fully trained as a spy, and he goes back to the school to search for clues. His search yields him with evidence to find Kanae, who was also a spy for the company she was working for. Keisuke then finds Kanae dying in an alleyway. Kanae tried to steal the Sleeping Beauty and his technology for a competing company, but was inevitably caught. Accompanying Kanae, though, was a girl in the sheet, this girl being Nemu, who has seemed to have regressed because of trauma. Keisuke takes Nemu, and they live out their happy life together, him vowing to protect her as they go on.
お兄ちゃんが助けてくれたの？これからどこへ行くの？
わからない。星が綺麗な場所がいいな。
お星様大好きだよ。この世界は知らないいろいろな場所があって、そこはキラキラしてて楽しいことでいっぱいなんだね。ああ、二人で必ず行こうな。
The core meat of this visual novel is the underground facility where Keisuke has to do various pranks, all of them being crazy to some degree. And the final part with all the revelations is really rushed in there in the final 2 to 3 hours of the game. And because of this, there's so much exposition and information dropped, it opens the world up by a massive degree. I would say it's kind of a detriment though, as the story itself could have really focused on one core element. And this was, is human nature truly evil? Again, I would have to say watch Chiken's video on it. He made such a great video. There's only a few things I really want to talk about, but before we move on to my topics, I want to read a review for Euphoria, which I think sums it up really well. When it's all said and done, I enjoyed my time with Euphoria. Once you see the real Euphoria, it gets its hooks in you and doesn't let go. It's an intriguing, thought-provoking, and exciting experience that doesn't pull any punches. And I can see why Euphoria has been able to build such an ardent following around it. I can now say beyond a doubt that Euphoria's story is a deep and complex web that overshadows its plentiful and extreme erotic content. However, it's also the type of story where if you poke and prod at it too much, it starts to fall apart. If you're the type to ignore these faults, then you will thoroughly enjoy it. I couldn't avert my eyes, however, as a result, Euphoria's clumsy storytelling prevents it from being great. Despite that, it was a memorable experience that I don't regret my time with. And this is a review from fuwanovel.net by Decay. I think it's a really great review. I think something about Euphoria grabs your attention. I think it's the extreme erotic content that also makes you want to look away, but also at the same time, how the characters portray themselves and the dialogue between them really hooks you in. Not something you really expect from a porn game. I want to take a quick moment to talk about the characters of Euphoria. I guess I'll start with Miyako, who had the least screen time of all of them since she dies literally at the start of the story. I find it funny that the voice actress for Miyako said, I really wish she didn't die, but we didn't see a body, so maybe she's still around. It's a bit of a shame. I do like my glasses characters, but whatever. Next up, my least favorite character, which has to be Natsuki Aoi. I don't like the teacher at all. I feel like she's very bland, especially when it comes to this story. I felt like none of her scenes really hit hard as compared to the other characters. My favorite scene from her is when she's in the black leather suit. But overall, because her part in the story is really played out at the end, she really doesn't add anything to the middle and beginning of the game, outside of playing her role as, I'm the teacher, I have to watch after you kids, but effectively doesn't really do that. She's not even in the second half of the game in the school until you come across her in the sadist route. And she also sloppily throws out exposition at the very end of the game. So because they needed the character to drop that much exposition, it sours her character. Next up is Rika, who I also think is a really weak part of the story. Not as weak as the teacher though, as Rika at least plays part in most of the routes. I also want to just say out there, I know that she's small and petite, but keep in mind, all of the other girls are high schoolers too, with the exception of the teacher. I really don't like the double standard of people saying petite girls are lollies and that they're underage. All of the characters are underage, again except the teacher. They're all high schoolers. So either it's all or nothing. Like, we can't just keep picking and choosing because one character is voluptuous and looks like an adult. There are real life women who look like Rika and that are adults. I like to use the example of Clara Dow, I think that's her name, who has a very small frame, no boobs, and she gets mistaken for a child all the time. I find it very annoying when people will say, oh, you like this character, they're underage, but then turn the cheek and say, well, this character is fine, when both are underage. Like, if you're going to call it out as something, be consistent. We can't just pick and choose the rules. We know what it means. But overall, I still didn't like Rika that much anyway, so it's not like I'm going to die on the hill for her. We also have Rinne, who's one of my favorite characters. I think her route itself sticks out the most, but at the same time, it comes out of nowhere, and it doesn't make a lot of sense when you first hear it. And even then, when you think back to you, you're like, oh, well, that sounds really stupid. She's somehow an artificial human, which her mother got pregnant by Keisuke, and they took her egg and then genetically modified her. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think Rinne had a lot of good scenes. It's just unfortunate her character really doesn't shine too much until she hits like the later point of her arc. Unfortunately, there's not much of a lesson to be learned from Rinne's arc either, as the cult that she's part of is way too fanatical, way too crazy, way too out there to really have much of a learning lesson from it. Outside that, cults are bad, but I think most people know that, and people who are stuck in cults, I don't think seeing Rinne will like help them realize, oh, I'm in a bad situation. Then again, people in cults probably don't have access to regular computers, or at least they're probably monitored a lot, so it doesn't matter. I just felt like her route was a little bit tropey towards the end until you get the twist, and even then tropey with Euphoria standards, so everything is like knocked up times 10. Then we have the two best characters, Nemu and Kanae. It's very hard for me to decide like which one I like more. I would say I'm leaning more towards Nemu, I think. To me, both Kanae and Nemu balance each other out, but Kanae for sure is the antagonist of the story. Yet there's a beautiful irony behind Kanae's cunningness. Because she's so willing to defile Keisuke's memories and his senses, it ends up, when you follow the true route, which is picking her, getting her abused. For those who believe in it, this is karma for her, because the bet she made with Nemu was all for her gain. Nemu gains nothing from the bet, and so Kanae, I believe, is a character that embodies someone who lacks empathy, while Nemu is one that is the embodiment of sympathy. I believe she gets all of my sympathy. I don't relate to wanting to escape to a paradise world, but I can understand why she would want to. And I really did love Nemu's acting, how committed she was to keep on her act just to get Keisuke to kill her. I mean, Kanae did a good job too with her acting, but she had the aid of the program and the manipulation collar. And I want to say a little bit about Keisuke, because we're actually going to talk about him a little later in this video. But for the most part, he is a blank slate character. He's very bland, he's very vanilla, and I would say for the good first half of the game, he is nothing more than a player insert, something to put the player in his shoes. But as the game goes on, he starts to develop more, especially when it comes to a sadistic nature, something I think most players are going to be like, whoa, wait, he can't be my input because I don't think like Keisuke. So he becomes his own character towards the end of the game as things start to spiral out of control, and becomes less of a generic MC-kun. Now, as far as I know, I don't know if there's a throwaway line telling us if Keisuke's sadistic nature was created artificially, but again, I will talk about that a little later. So Euphoria tackles a lot of themes. 1, about life being a simulation. 2, about human nature itself, and it's even a meta commentary on violent media. I believe the simulation aspect of Euphoria is its weakest point, as it allows the writers to just do whatever they want. And because most of the simulation was mentioned at the very end of the game, it really doesn't play a strong part in the key's story and the characters, as it truly only exists to screw with Keisuke. But we can ask, if there was a way we could live in a simulation, would you decide to run away into a virtual world just to escape the pain of your regular life? Or would you run into that virtual world to be able to commit all the atrocities without having any guilt about it? Euphoria truly does ask the hard question. I myself would never take a paradise virtual world over my real life, but I'm sure this is the kind of thing that people with illnesses, diseases, or who have suffered major abuse in their life might see comfort in, to be able to escape to a new world where all that suffering doesn't exist. But to me, this is where I think the contradiction of a paradise exists. If we were able to get away from the world because of that suffering, wouldn't the fact that being in that world itself is a statement of our own suffering? Unless you were able to wipe your consciousness of all the pain that you felt, being in that world itself is truly just a reminder of how much you suffered in your own life. So my question to you is, if you were given the chance to live in a simulation, would you commit horrible atrocities? So I'll let that one stew for you for a little bit as we talk about Keisuke and his nature. I believe one of the reasons Keisuke became so morally decrepit is because his memories were erased. At that point, Keisuke was put back at a null state. No personality, no social evolution. There's many different philosophies on human nature, and these are just some ideas I'm pulling in from different sources. Some believing that morality is created through humanity's actions. We only see what's morally right through the societies around us. A village of people living in the tribes will easily kill the baby if it's crippled or has some sort of disease at birth, as it hinders their society. And for the most part, the child would be better off dead instead of living weakened in its society. The society we live in determines what is good and evil. There is inherently no such thing as good and evil. These are only opinions that we draw upon other people. I believe most modern societies would call Keisuke an evil person. Other philosophies believe that humans are selfish by nature. We want to take by nature. Our natural instinct is to take for ourselves in order to prolong our well-being. And this could be well-being of health, mentally, and socially. But the reason we don't do such a thing is because of something that's called veneer theory. And this theory argues that we no longer have instincts that we want to primarily follow, solely because our morality created by society is able to override these instincts. And this is where I believe Keisuke falls into. When his memories were destroyed, all of the social upbringing he had was destroyed as well, making him want to follow primal instincts. As prior to his memories being erased, he actually came off as a normal kid, even kind-hearted enough to take care of Nemu and teach her a lot of things. And because of this, Keisuke lacked a sense of empathy. Empathy being nothing more than the result of social evolution. We are taught empathy. We are not born with it. But because Keisuke lacked the empathy and returned to his primal nature, he found a state of euphoria, the feeling or state of intense excitement and happiness when he was torturing other people. Keisuke at his worst as a human being was his highest as an individual. When I think back to media like Euphoria, I call back to The Clockwork Orange and Battle Royale, two very hyper-violent series, both aiding in being meta-commentaries on the violence of the respective eras. Some even call Euphoria sexual horror, which I think defines it very well. If we look at it, I believe Keisuke would be equivalent of your Scream, or any other human killer in a horror film. Now, of course, I'm on the end that, a murderer is way worse than someone like Keisuke. And for that, let's jump to our next segment, which is violent media. Evil versus evil. Where do we determine the line? Of course, my stance is that fiction has free reign to do whatever it wants, and I don't believe that we should limit what types of fiction should be created. As I said in my last video, it's up to the individual to separate fiction from reality. Many people have asked this: why is a murderer not seen as bad as a rapist in media? Sometimes we even idolize the murderers in media who are the protagonists of the story. Our protagonists might have to go through and kill many people, but that isn't given the same type of shame as it would be a rapist. Now, don't get me wrong here, I'm not playing devil's advocate for either of the crimes. They're both objectively evil. But I wanted to go in a deep dive of why people thought I'd rather be killed than raped. as I myself could not agree with such a thing. I think dying is truly the worst thing that could happen to you, or at least dying of someone else's selfishness. Of course, like all things that pertain to humans, it's a far more nuanced conversation. And since I'm not a woman, I don't actually understand the inherent fear when it comes to assaults. But I did want to at least cherry pick some arguments I've seen from people. One being that people can empathize with victims of assault. It's much easier to empathize with a person who has survived than a person who has died. And I very much agree with this. You can't ask a dead person or a murdered person how they feel about it. But I did find a very callous nature when people say when a person dies, it's done and done. To me, I feel like when someone is murdered, there are far more victims involved. Friends, families, parents, their children, siblings. There's so many people involved with the death of someone else that it creates multiple victims. Of course, that's not to mitigate the damage that is done from an assault, but we have to be honest that a murder will generally create far more victims, especially since people who are normally assaulted don't speak up about it. Another point is that it ruins what is supposed to be an intimate moment, something that is supposed to represent the expression of love itself. The act of this violence could never be justified by any means, as opposed to murder, which can be used in self-defense, war, and a few other justified reasons. Assaulting someone would never save them from danger, as opposed to having to kill someone in order to save another person's life. If you allow me to make a quick aside here, I once came across a life or death situation. I was going out to get gas one day. As I was pulling up to the gas station, I saw the clerk with his hands up, and I'm like, what's going on here? In a matter of seconds, I immediately knew what was happening. They were getting robbed. Two men pointing their guns at the clerk. I decided to drive up to the gas station and use my car to block everyone else who was coming in. Of course, I tucked myself down, I turned my lights off, and I just blocked it, hoping that the gunshots would never go off against the people. But anyone who pulled up, I said, hey, it's a robbery, they have guns, you need to get out of here. Luckily, no one was hurt. After the men ran off with bags of money, I went inside the store and just asked if everyone was okay. And the clerk said to me, we don't want to call 911, it will just cause us more problems. You know, I'm sure those people are going to have to live with the trauma of being in that kind of situation, but for sure, I think they're glad to just be alive. I believe death to be our final destination. And at the end of the day, all humans will go through some sort of suffering. I believe suffering is just human. Whether it be me, you, or someone you know, we've all been through some sort of pain in our life. But to overcome those pains are truly what make us human. Now, I might be an outlier in this case, but I believe when a character murders another character, they stop becoming what they really are. I think the act of taking someone else's life will create a drastic change within yourself. And I believe this change will happen regardless if it's self-defense or aggravated murder. Regardless, the realization of taking someone else's life is a big deal. I know we become desensitized to physical violence in media, especially very graphic violence, like take the Saw movies for example. Media like The Clockwork Orange might be on to something, that sooner or later we might be so desensitized that any type of violence won't even faze us. Another thing people tend to mention is that assault itself has a weaker punishment, and it's because if it had an even stricter punishment like the death penalty, then we would see a lot more victims just be killed. I think there's a lot to say about violent media. We become desensitized to death itself, and the act of assault has been stigmatized in media for a very long time, and not just assault, but sex in general, as many in the modern society are taught that sex is a private matter. While Euphoria unfortunately flops at his latter end, handling Keisuke's evil nature, outside of just being a nukige, Euphoria serves as a good thought exercise on how we consume violent media. Of course, I can't end the video without my own opinion. For the most part, Euphoria is extreme eroticism, with very niche fetishes, only meant to appeal to the most hardcore. I myself have already said I enjoy Clock Up's works. A good number of their more recent works have been more visceral. Dead Days and Magabates have been one of my favorites. Dead Days doesn't have a translation so far that I believe of, so I really don't know what it's about, to be honest. I just kind of like the opening theme. But I am fond of stories that question human nature, as truly we don't have a real answer to this. We can look up as many philosophers as we want. We can look into our biology as much as we want, but because we differentiate so much between person to person, we can never truly understand each other. I believe it's interesting to see that many philosophers believed that humans were naturally evil. But not in the way that we wanted to hurt people all the time, is because we're just generally born selfish. and that selfish nature is what allows us to commit evils. Again, I believe that violent media has a place to exist, but at the same time, I do think it needs to be handled with a certain amount of care when it's distributed towards the public. And this time around, I'm not talking about some people writing fan fictions or whatever. I think those are generally harmless. I think Metal Gear Revengeance says it the best.
Really? Let me ask you. All those cyborgs you've killed up to now, maybe they weren't kids, but they were people. You ever think about them? When you're chopping them into hamburger?
They're adults. They made their choice.
Sure they're adults. Sure they signed up for this. Right on the dotted line of their BMC contract. Usually they're no strangers to war. In fact, many times they already lost a limb or two. But they made their choice, right? Open your eye and see, Raiden.
I've seen plenty.
Then listen. Listen to them.
What are you talking about?
There he is! Kill him! This isn't fair. Little punk.
Listen closely now.
Die! This life. I watched my wife and son die. This is all I had left. Finish him off! Whatever it takes to be free of this torture. Stop it!